Wendy Davis is lashing out. Now the candidate for Texas governor is at war with Rush Limbaugh and Greg Abbott. This after a list of big blunders. The candidate called out for lying about her past and accused of going after her Republican opponent, not for his politics, but because he's in a wheelchair. And Rush Limbaugh is not having any of it.
This is the woman that made a big splash. Filibustering an anti-abortion law in Texas. And so she became an immediate star in the Democrat Party in Texas. And they began pushing her for higher orifice. But the problem is she's a leftist, and therefore there is fraud and deceit woven through her life story, which it has been discovered now has some issues. It seems, when you boil it all down, that Wendy Davis would have ended up being really poor and destitute were it not for a man. But that's no problem. They just made stuff up. They worked for Obama.
Well, the Wendy Davis campaign firing back, both at Limbaugh and Abbott. Greg Abbott's campaign desperately attacked Wendy's story after we outraised them last week. I think we have them scared. They'll try anything, including the typical dirty tricks we're all tired of. And then continued, Rush Limbaugh, in one of his infamous outbursts, joined in on the attacks. We always knew we'd face some vicious attacks, but this goes beyond the normal political nonsense. These are personal. Davis's opponent, Texas Attorney General Greg Abbott, joins us. Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Greta. Great to be with you.
Fine. It's great to have you. So what in the world is going on between you and Wendy Davis and Rush Limbaugh? It's gotten particularly vitriolic.
Well, Greta, it's gotten even more bizarre over the last couple of days. First, the underlying story that Rush was talking about was actually an article written by a reporter for the Dallas Morning News that I had nothing to do with. But what's happened over the last couple of days goes from bizarre to almost laughable. What happened is that a group of campaign activists for Wendy Davis came out and actually mocked the disabled, mocked people who use wheelchairs. And as you know, because I've been there on your set, I happen to be in a wheelchair because of an accident that left me needing to use a wheelchair that crushed my spine. But then, Greta, what happened is gone viral over the last couple of days because these so-called truthers have come out questioning whether or not I really need to use a wheelchair, despite the fact that I've been in one for 30 years now. And so the reality, Greta, is that there's all this back and forth going on, and I think it's a prelude to what's about to happen in this race in Texas for the next 9 months that matters deeply to your audience. And that is, there is a battle for the future of Texas and the future of America taking place in this race for governor in Texas.
All right, I'll tell you what, something that bothers me. I went through all of this stuff today. I even looked at some of the personal assaults, not from you, but from someone else, some conservative person on Wendy Davis that I thought was bad, and I blogged about it. But on websites associated with her campaign, it says things like, Wendy needs us standing with her. Stand up with Wendy, Texas rally. And I don't know, maybe I'm a little bit sensitive, but I think that's code, standing up. I actually think if I were running against someone who was in a wheelchair, I would be mortified if the word standing appeared in any of my literature, only on the off chance that I might hurt someone who's in a wheelchair or say something to people who are disabled. And yet I don't see that she's ever disavowed it. And I have pictures of people with signs standing up for Wendy. And I know she had that filibuster, but still, do you think that they are mocking you with those remarks, or do you think it's coincidental?
Well, Greta, the deal is there was this film, an undercover film that was recorded by James O'Keefe that surfaced late last week, showing her supporters in a room quite literally laughing at people with disabilities. So we know for a fact that they are mocking those with disabilities. And of course, that's unworthy of what we stand for here in Texas, where we believe in the quality of the character of an individual as opposed to any kind of superficial appearances.
Well, I would think that if I were Wendy Davis and all this was sort of swirling around me, this whole idea of mocking someone with disabilities, I guess I would make a statement. I would make a very public statement. I would condemn anyone who was insensitive, who might be using a caught on tape, or I would even apologize for the inartful use of particular words that may have another meaning or something. But it's just too coincidental that I find it in so much of this, campaign information about her. That's the problem.
Well, I think I know why they are doing this, Greta, and that's because Senator Davis knows that if she has to run on the issues in the state of Texas, that's a loser for her. She supports Obamacare. I'm against Obamacare. I'm for energy production. She's for embracing the Obama-style EPA practices in Texas. And so she's a dead loser on the issues that matter most to Texans. And so her only hope is to get caught up in all these kind of ridiculous arguments that are taking place right now.
Well, it is disheartening when a race, gets to that point. But anyway, Attorney General, nice to see you, sir.
You too, Greta. Thanks.
Joining us, our panel, Jason Riley from the Wall Street Journal, A.B. Stoddard of The Hill, and Michael Crowley of Time Magazine. Jason, first to you. Am I being too sensitive about this use of the word standing in so much literature and apparently this video, or is this sort of a covert way to mock Greg Abbott because he's in a wheelchair?
Well, I wouldn't put it past some of these activists to go there. But I think the reality is that it's the Davis camp that's desperate here. And it's interesting that they're calling Abbott desperate. If you look at the polling on this race, we haven't seen a whole lot of it. But in November, there was a poll that showed Abbott 15 points ahead in this race. So it's not that close, so far as we know. And I think it's Davis who's desperate. And she got caught fibbing. I think Rush Limbaugh was right. She got caught in a lie. It's brought her this national attention, and rightly so. I think it speaks to her character. A lot of Americans think that a woman who walked out on young children, it speaks to the character of that person. It's not something you see very often in our society, and it's not something a lot of people in this country want to see often in our society.
And I'll go to you, A.B. I think women get scrutinized far more intensely than male candidates. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think I've seen what happened to Governor Palin, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. I mean, they're really under the microscope. But she had a pretty good story before it got fudged. I mean, she had a pretty good story. Say, why in the world did she fudge it a little bit, or lie, as her opponents would say?
Well, it was political. She, to this day, is not backing down from that story. She says she's going to tell it again and again, and that Greg Abbott's campaign has attacked her story.
Have they, or is it the newspaper?
No, it was Wayne Slater's reporting, and it would never had anything to do with the Abbott campaign. But since minute one, their defense has been that it's all Greg Abbott's fault, and they're attacking him. She obviously has augmented or amended her story or whatever to make it a little bit more dramatic. And you're right, it was dramatic enough to begin with. But what she's doing now, if you look at sort of her placeholder in this race, she is building a political future that she could really screw up by attacking somebody in a wheelchair. It's one thing to run against this guy and run a tough campaign and lose in a state that still isn't purple. But she has a real future as a star in the party. She could be a senator one day. At this point, not only, I mean, there's a Stand With Rand hashtag for Senator Paul and this kind of thing, but one of her statements was, he's never walked a mile in my shoes.
I know. She used bad use of words. Michael?
I just think that these phrases, walked a mile in my shoes, and particularly stand with, are perfect political cliches you've heard a million times from campaigns and Memorial. I think it would be bonkers to attack your opponent, an opponent in a wheelchair, using that language.
But you'd say,
who are you going to win over? It doesn't make any sense to me.
If I use that in a campaign, though, because it is common, you say, stand with me, but if I use, I go, oops, sorry. I didn't mean it that way. That's what I would do when I'm realizing.
Okay, so I think the most important thing to me is, what is the motive? Is this intentional? I would say, particularly a woman, as one of you just pointed out, did this long filibuster, and it's like Stand With Rand, Stand With Wendy. Standing was a part of what she is famous for. So the motive, to me, it doesn't make sense logically. As a political proposition, now that it's an interview, it's being talked about on television, the allegations have been leveled, would it do her any harm to stand up and say, look, it's I can see how some people would misinterpret it. Obviously, that's not our intention, so we'll choose different language and let's go right back to the issues. Maybe she should do that. But the motive to me doesn't make sense.
I would be much more passionate about saying, never in a million years would I have done that. I feel terrible about it. It never occurred to me. Not just sort of like, some people may have done it and some people might.
That would be fine too, but I really don't think it makes any sense to think that this was a the political gain is impossible to imagine. What voters are you going to win over?
She's just allowed it to look that way. That's because she hasn't said anything yet.
That's right. Anyway, panel, thanks. We're going to be back with you shortly.